I was catching up with a younger friend at a cafe yesterday, and the whole mood just shifted the moment she unlocked her phone.
Oh, I think I know where this is going.
Yeah. She turns the screen to me, and there's this viral post. Some self-proclaimed feminist online just being, well, undeniably aggressive, a bit hypocritical, and frankly, a bit cringe.
Right.
And my friend just groans, lets out this long sigh, and she says, "See? This is exactly why I'm done. I don't even call myself a feminist anymore. The whole thing is just too toxic."
And she seemed relieved to say it, right?
Completely relieved. Like she was unsubscribing from something.
Right.
But as I'm watching her, this woman who just told me about leading a big project at work, paying for her own coffee with her own money, I just saw this jarring disconnect. She was ready to abandon the entire ideology that, secured the very chair she was sitting in, all because the messengers on her timeline were annoying.
It's like confusing the weather forecast with the actual weather.
Exactly. It's like deciding an entire religion is fake because you saw a pastor behave badly. The logic was, because she is flawed, the movement is fake. It really made me wonder, at what point did we start confusing the messy, imperfect humans with the actual solid ground we're all standing on?
That story is, well, it's incredibly common. And it really captures the central challenge for, I think, almost all contemporary social justice movements.
It's not just feminism, then.
Not at all. What you saw was the psychological impact of online performative activism colliding head-on with the sustained engagement of young people. It just highlights this really critical, almost tragic tension.
To disconnect.
The disconnect, exactly, between a robust, necessary structural idea, the solid ground, as you put it, and the very visible, often very flawed individual messengers who are operating under just immense pressure.
That pressure really feels like the key, and that's what we're diving into today. We want to really unpack that disconnect because the core mission here is to figure out when people, especially younger people, reject the movement wholesale.
Yeah, throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Completely. Whether it's feminism, racial justice, climate activism, because the individuals representing it online seem toxic or burnt out or maybe a little too self-promoting. What is the actual structural loss to society?
The loss is potentially catastrophic. I mean, that's not an exaggeration because the problems these movements are trying to solve are systemic. They're not individual.
Right.
So our mission today is really to move past that superficial toxicity and try to understand the structural and psychological forces that create it in the first place. We have to figure out what's being lost when we reject the movement just because we don't like the person delivering the message.
So a roadmap, where do we start?
We'll start with the immense internal and external pressures that cause this activist burnout. Then we'll look at the specific ways digital platforms commodify and, frankly, distort these political messages.
And then finally.
And then we have to get back to the solid ground. We need to recenter on the historical and ideological core of feminism to appreciate what that perspective actually offers. The kind of structural critique that exists completely independently of the people on TikTok who might be yelling about it.
Okay. So to understand the cringe my friend was talking about, we first have to understand the sheer human cost of being an activist today.
Exactly.
She called the discourse toxic, but what we're seeing suggests this negativity isn't just, bad manners. It's the outward-facing symptom of this immense, crushing psychological and physical strain.
You're right. And it comes from a mindset that is at its core biologically unsustainable. There's this pervasive mentality that's often called the "I'll sleep when I'm dead" approach.
I've heard that. It sounds dedicated, but also dangerous.
It's both. It comes from this belief that the systems of oppression are so immediate, so dangerous, that taking any time for rest or prioritizing your own health feels like a betrayal to the cause. And that dedication crosses a line into self-detriment because the urgency feels so existential.
And the costs aren't abstract, are they? They're physical. We see this in the experience of Nyala Adari, who co-founded Freedom March NYC. She was right in the middle of organizing huge racial justice protests in 2020.
Her account is so important because it shows the fight isn't just mental, it's somatic, it's in the body. She talks about the physical signs of extreme, prolonged stress, the kind that comes from 20-hour days and, directly confronting violence and injustice.
So what did that look like for her physically?
She describes finding a bald spot on her scalp and suffering from really painful cystic acne. For her, those were these blaring signals that her body was, and this is her word, screaming for rest. It was showing her that the pace was just impossible to maintain.
That physical collapse.
Yeah.
It's a direct result of that belief that the cause has to come first no matter what.
No matter the individual's capacity. And it goes beyond even these serious medical signs. There's this, it's a bizarre but really instructive detail from Lori Bertram Roberts, who runs an abortion fund. She has this sort of gallows humor about it, and she jokes, ask any activist how long they can hold their pee for.
Wow.
And that tiny little anecdote, it just powerfully signifies the complete prioritization of a cause over the most immediate, fundamental bodily needs.
Food, sleep, bathroom breaks.
All of it. When activists are habitually denying themselves those basic things, it's an extreme sacrifice. And while we might celebrate that dedication on the surface, it leads to a catastrophic high turnover rate in these organizations.
Which hurts the movement in the long run.
Massively. Dr. Paul Gorski, who's done a lot of research on this, he notes that this high turnover leads to this tragic, systemic loss of movement knowledge. You lose all that accumulated expertise. As Bertram Roberts put it so sadly, burnout ain't cute. It actively harms the movement's long-term effectiveness.
Okay, so this high turnover and visible suffering. It brings us to Dr. Gorski's work on the 4 main causes of activist burnout. This feels like a really useful framework for decoding where all this online negativity actually comes from.
It's essential. The first cause he identifies is what he calls the emotional or dispositional strain.
Okay, what does that mean?
This is when activists start to feel like they're solely responsible for eliminating oppression. The weight of the world is on their individual shoulders.
That's an impossible burden.
It is. It's completely self-imposed, but it comes from a place of deep empathy. They're so aware of the urgency and the trauma of it all that they feel personally responsible for eradicating it, all by themselves.
And if you feel like you're the only person standing between, say, an oppressed group and total failure, you can't ethically justify taking a day off.
You can't. You can't step away from the keyboard. You can't turn off the news. That path only leads to one place: collapse.
And that collapse is sped up by the second cause, which is structural.
Right. Activists aren't just fighting, a few bad people. They're confronting these deeply entrenched systems: racism, sexism, ableism, cisgenderism, systems that are literally designed to perpetuate the very problems they're fighting.
So it's that feeling of running up a down escalator.
And the escalator is speeding up, and every day the gravity seems to increase. The sheer scale of the opposition is just structurally exhausting.
And if the scale of the system wasn't enough, they also face this acute personal danger. The third cause is backlash.
And this is terrifyingly acute for younger, highly visible activists online. You just have to look at the experience of Thandie Abdullah, who helped launch the Black Lives Matter Youth Vanguard at just 13 years old.
13? That's unbelievable.
It is. Abdullah's story just shows the really dark side of that visibility. They spent 3 incredibly formative years of their youth relentlessly organizing, trying to get random searches and police presence out of schools in LA.
But the backlash was brutal.
Brutal is the word. Their family's house was targeted repeatedly by swatting.
Can you just explain what swatting is for anyone who might not know?
Of course. It's a calculated, incredibly dangerous harassment tactic where someone calls in a fake emergency, a hostage situation, a bomb threat, to draw a massive armed police response to a private home.
So that's a direct threat to your life, not just online comments.
Precisely. We're talking about physical danger that's orchestrated remotely. Their personal information was sold on the dark web. They and their family were forced to move to sleep on couches, all during a pandemic and a racial justice uprising.
That level of targeted harassment, surveillance, and real danger, it's an unimaginable stressor.
It proves the risk isn't just reputational, it's existential.
Okay, so given that immense external pressure, that brings us to the fourth cause, which feels really relevant to why people like my friend disengage. It's the in-movement stresses.
Yes, the internal friction.
The disagreements over goals or framing or approach, and that can feel so devastating because it's coming from inside your supposed safe space.
When you feel like you're in a life or death battle against systemic oppression, and then you turn around and you're fighting your own supposed allies over, semantics, it is exponentially demoralizing.
It feels like the betrayal.
A deep betrayal, and that's why it often manifests as the toxicity people see online.
And if you're already coming from a marginalized community, that internal stress is compounded, which is just a cruel irony. You go to activism for solidarity, and you find more marginalization.
It's a huge problem. For racial justice activists of color, for instance, a primary cause of their burnout is often cited as Interactions with white organizers.
With their own allies.
With their own allies. We're talking about the cumulative impact of microaggressions and macroaggressions from the very people they're supposed to be in the trenches with.
It's an emotional tax. I'm thinking of Lori Bertram Roberts again, who described this kind of emotional labor. She called it having to be the white people whisperer.
Yes, constantly having to explain why something is racist or conducting racism 101 workshops, often for free, for people who really should already get it.
That energy spent educating your allies is energy you can't spend fighting the actual oppressor.
It's directly taken away from that fight. And this creates this awful compounding effect. Dr. Gorski found that if someone already feels marginalized in their daily life, if they're LGBTQ plus, low-income, disabled, a woman of color, then experiencing more marginalization in an activist space just puts them on the fast track to severe burnout.
I can see how that plays out structurally, too, especially with inclusion. If an organization doesn't provide accommodations for disabled activists,
or if low-income activists don't have a credit card to reserve a room for a meeting or buy supplies,
they're systematically excluded. They're made to feel like an afterthought.
And it immediately makes the work unsustainable for the people who have the biggest stake in the fight. Bertram Roberts mentioned hearing coded language suggesting she shouldn't be in leadership because she couldn't always be at those high-energy, visible marches.
Because of her lived circumstances.
Exactly. So when organizations prioritize those visible, high-energy actions that require a certain physical capacity and financial flexibility over genuine inclusion, they are systematically pushing out essential voices. And that just deepens the movement's internal fractures.
So, okay. The messengers are exhausted, they're facing terrifying backlash, they're fighting amongst themselves. Now let's shift to the platform itself, social media.
The digital vortex.
Yes. This is where the toxicity gets amplified and, crucially, commodified. And that creates the cringe and that superficial feeling my friend was talking about.
Social media is just this profound contradiction for activism. On the one hand, you have someone like Neela Adari, who found it absolutely essential for rapid outreach, for building her platform, for spreading data about protests. It's a powerful tool.
For decentralizing information and rapid mobilization.
Absolutely. But the other side,
yeah,
the stress and distraction side, is so much more insidious, especially for young, talented activists.
Yep.
Fendui Abdullah observed that activists can get completely consumed by publicity metrics.
Chasing the blue tick.
Chasing that coveted blue tick on Instagram, exactly. And they lose sight of the real, difficult, on-the-ground community work.
And this is where the corporatization of organizing really takes hold, right? Abdullah called this a super huge part of this movement where people feel this pressure to become an activist girl boss.
A girl boss, yes. A persona that's defined by individual success metrics, not collective change. And when activism becomes just another way to make money, to get brand deals, to profit from the suffering of marginalized groups, the real meaning of the work just gets lost in the metrics and the views.
And capitalism becomes, as they put it, a sinister, evil force.
That profit motive is what fuels the perception that the whole movement is superficial, that it's all about individual monetized success and not collective liberation and actual policy change.
This perceived superficiality, it's the hallmark of what's called neoliberal feminism, isn't it?
That's the term for it, yes. It describes this phenomenon where feminist goals get aligned with corporate values, which creates this huge risk of depoliticizing the core issues. Well, classic feminism, focus on state intervention. Things like protective legislation, affirmative action, government-funded services. Neoliberal feminism, on the other hand, shifts the focus away from structural change and onto individual empowerment, choice, and consumer action.
So instead of fighting for federal equal pay legislation, you're just told to lean in, negotiate harder, and buy the right empowerment-branded T-shirt.
You've got it. It turns the entire fight into a lifestyle brand. And the critique is that while these corporate campaigns might raise some awareness, they ultimately prioritize corporate profits and marketing appeal over genuine, substantive, systemic advocacy. They promote personal success over collective struggle.
And we are just bombarded with these examples every single day, which is why the cringe factor is so high.
The examples are everywhere. Think about Dove's Real Beauty campaign from 2004.
Oh, I remember that. It was praised for body positivity, for using diverse models.
Widely praised. But critics pretty quickly pointed out that it primarily serves Dove's business interests by creating an emotional connection to their brand. It doesn't actually challenge the deeper structural beauty standards and the multi-billion-dollar industries that impose those impossible ideals in the first place.
Right. Or what about Always Like a Girl campaign?
Another perfect example, an incredibly powerful, empowering message, trying to redefine that phrase as a strength. It got massive attention, massive sales. But the underlying commercial motive to sell menstrual products raised serious questions about how sincere that feminist message was beyond the bottom line.
And Nike's Dream Crazier with Serena Williams, it's inspirational, but it's also leveraging her to sell shoes.
Exactly. In all these cases, deep structural critiques get swapped for these easy individual empowerment narratives. The consumer just needs to dream crazier or lean in, instead of focusing on dismantling the systems that created the barriers in the first place.
This focus on easily marketable declarations leads straight to criticisms of slacktivism and performative activism, movements like Time's Up or Aphoria.
They're prime examples. Time's Up got and deserved praise for raising awareness about sexual harassment and for its legal defense fund.
But it faced intense critique for focusing on the experiences of privileged women in Hollywood.
Right. It prioritized celebrity endorsements and public declarations over the kind of substantive, sustained policy shifts that would benefit, say, minimum wage workers. Similarly, Aphoria, which engages men, is often criticized for emphasizing individual allyship, wearing a pin, making a pledge over the harder foundational work of dismantling patriarchy within institutions.
It's like the corporate rainbow that disappears on July 1st.
That is the perfect visual metaphor. Movements that prioritize public declarations are easily marketed, but those declarations often vanish the second the trend fades. And the critique is that it all feels superficial. It lacks the consistent long-term commitment that you need for real legislative change.
And the digital sphere just makes this worse by creating this other overwhelming source of internal stress, the burnout from semantic perfection.
Yes. This internal fighting over language and definitions is precisely what pushes people out. It makes the movement feel toxic and unwelcoming from the inside.
This is the nitpicking my friend saw. It sounds like a circular firing squad.
It functions exactly like one. Look at Paxton Smith's experience. She went viral after she ditched her approved valedictorian speech to talk about the abortion ban in Texas.
She expected backlash from opponents, obviously.
Of course. But she was shocked by the nasty comments she got from informed people within the movement.
And they weren't attacking her stance on abortion.
No, they were attacking her language. They would constantly nitpick her educational TikTok videos, criticizing her for failed explanations or for using the wrong wording, often because she had to compress these incredibly complex legal concepts into a short video format.
The platform demands brevity, but the internal standards demand academic perfection. It's an impossible situation.
And Dr. Gorski saw this across all kinds of organizing spaces. He's seen activists get into these vicious personal arguments over incredibly subtle distinctions, like whether to use the word equity or justice or anti-oppression.
To an outsider, that looks petty, it looks academic.
But the stakes feel incredibly high to the people involved. And those terms do carry real academic and political weight. But fighting over them with such personal viciousness is just devastating.
Can we break that down, the difference between, say, equity and justice?
Sure. A simple way to think of it is that equity is about giving people what they need to succeed, which often means unequal resources to achieve an equal outcome, while justice is about dismantling the structural barriers that created the inequity in the first place.
So the debate is about the scope of the intervention.
Exactly. But when that debate happens with so much personal animosity, the consequence is this immense pressure to say the exact on-message right thing all the time. And that ultimately leads to widespread self-censorship.
Because if you're terrified of being called out by your own side for using the wrong adjective in a 60-second clip, it's just safer to say nothing at all.
As Paxton Smith said, it scares you into saying nothing at all.
And that is the real strategic implication we need to focus on. When people, especially potential new allies, are scared into silence, the movement loses momentum. The collective power you need for policy change just evaporates.
It's a self-defeating mechanism. The fixation on linguistic purity becomes completely counterproductive to the actual goal of structural reform.
Okay, so we have a clear diagnosis. The messengers are burning out, they're in physical danger, and they're operating in a digital world that rewards superficiality while punishing semantic imperfection.
Pretty grim picture.
It is. So when you peel all of that messy process away, what's left? What is the solid ground that holds this whole project together? And why is abandoning it a strategic mistake?
The solid ground is the theoretical and historical core of feminism. And its necessity hasn't changed because of one unpleasant social media post. To really understand why rejecting the movement over the messengers is a mistake, we have to acknowledge the essential, enduring complexity of the ideology itself.
And that starts by just admitting that feminism is incredibly hard to define. And that's okay.
It's more than okay. It's a necessary starting point. Scholars define feminism as a discursive term. It's a concept that holds many and sometimes contradictory meanings.
So there's no single rule book.
There is no single, unitary feminist perspective. And there's never been one across time or across cultures. The singular term feminism is often just used for aesthetic preference, to lend its solidity and power in political arguments. But that single word hides a reality of diverse competing goals.
The sources we looked at, like Thompson and Bryson, they both emphasize that feminists are often profoundly and at times bitterly divided.
And not just over strategy, but over fundamental goals. Should the aim be equality with men or a complete dismantling of gender roles altogether? So this division, it isn't a modern flaw or a sign of toxicity. It's an inherent generative feature of a movement that spans so many different perspectives and global concerns.
Recognizing that also requires us to admit that the history isn't some neat, linear story.
Right. That popular wave metaphor, first wave, second wave, third wave, it's often presented as this unified marching timeline of progress. But historical accounts show that this structure is, well, it's a bit of an artifice. It simplifies a really complicated, messy struggle.
And why is calling it an artifice so important for us to understand?
Because that simplified structure tends to erase the contributions of marginalized women whose activism didn't fit neatly into that timeline of white Western progress. For example, the first wave is often presented as being solely about suffrage. But in reality, campaigners like the Pankhursts in the UK had deep political differences even as they fought for the vote. Emmeline Pankhurst later ran as a conservative candidate, which is a fundamental departure from the socialist or liberal goals of other suffragists. It was never monolithic.
And looking back now, we can critique that early feminism for being, oblivious to its classist, homophobic, and at times racist underpinnings.
And the movement only evolved precisely because of those internal challenges, because of dissent from marginalized groups.
So that internal critique wasn't toxicity, it was the engine of growth.
It was the necessary engine of growth and ideological clarification. You had Black feminists like Bell Hooks, Audre Lorde, Patricia Hill Collins, and they pointed out that second-wave feminism mistakenly focused on the specific conditions of one group, typically white middle-class women, and then generalized those experiences to all women, everywhere.
The big insight was that you can't just talk about women's issues without specifying which women you're talking about.
Exactly. And that correction led to what's been called a profound revolution in feminist thought. It forced the movement to look inward, to examine its own exclusionary tendencies, and to realize that solidarity can't just be assumed. It has to be built inclusively.
So the movement got stronger by being radically self-aware and self-critical, which is messy but vital.
It's absolutely vital in theory, even if it's unpleasant in practice. So when you see people fighting online, you aren't seeing a sign of illegitimacy. You're witnessing the necessary, though sometimes abrasive, process of ideological clarification that has always been the hallmark of a healthy, evolving social movement.
And the ideological core, that solid ground, it's ultimately rooted in this radical shift, right? The understanding that subordination comes from systemic structure, not individual flaws.
Yes, that was the initial earth-shattering realization captured by the slogan, "The personal is the political."
Let's clarify that slogan, because I think it gets misinterpreted a lot today. It didn't mean that, your choice of lipstick is a political act.
No, it meant the opposite of individualism. It meant that a woman's subordination was not the result of her personal inadequacy or her individual mistakes or her bad choices. It was the direct result of entrenched social relations, institutional practices, and systemic structure.
Things like family law, employment discrimination, access to credit.
Exactly. That realization shifted the burden of failure from the individual woman to the entire system she was living under.
And that structural understanding is where the concept of intersectionality became absolutely necessary, to combat the exclusivity within the movement itself.
The theoretical necessity of intersectionality is just undeniable. We have to remember Spellman's crucial point. Though all women are women, no woman is only a woman.
That's a profound phrase.
It is. It means the category of woman is always inflected by race, by class, by disability, by sexuality.
So the feminist analysis had to expand beyond just gender. It had to account for these converging lines of various forms of oppression.
It had to. Intersectionality became the essential framework for confronting the fact that if you fail to acknowledge these differences, you can end up with an essentialist, classist, and racist theory that only serves the most privileged.
Because if you only look at gender, you miss how a Black working-class woman's experience is structurally different from a white middle-class woman's experience.
The framework of intersectionality is non-negotiable for modern feminism. It is the intellectual tool that supports a more inclusive path forward.
So the solid ground is this rigorous, complex, theoretical framework. It's designed to analyze and dismantle systemic oppression. And that framework persists regardless of whether a particular activist on social media is behaving badly or is burnt out or is prioritizing profit over policy.
The necessity of the ideology transcends the flaws of its current messengers.
Okay, so if we accept that the structural necessity of the movement is still there, even if the messengers are flawed, the solution to the burnout and the toxicity isn't found in more individualism.
No, it's found in recentering around collective sustainability.
Which means swapping that celebrated, corporatized self-care model
For a robust model of community care. Exactly. Lori Bertram Roberts stressed that highly individualized self-care, take a bubble bath, do some yoga, it never truly helped her through the really tough times. It was always my community pulling me through, she said.
That's a key realization.
It is. Good leadership, as Dr. Gorski argues, is fundamentally about listening, about reminding people to take breaks, and about actively creating an environment that fosters change without putting the cause over the health of the people fighting for it.
We need to push for institutional solutions, then, to address the systemic conditions that cause the burnout, rather than just telling individuals to fix themselves.
This is where the practical structural change comes in. Organizations need to be linking activists with external, culturally informed mental health support.
And we're seeing some of this happen, right?
We are. We're seeing nonprofit workers unionize. Reproductive justice organizations like the Guttmacher Institute and Planned Parenthood have done this recently. And that's a profound structural step to protect workers from the relentless pressure of their missions.
And things like mutual aid.
Mutual aid systems are essential, especially for volunteer organizers who need help with bills, rent, food, so they don't feel forced into that girl boss model just to survive.
And at a more fundamental level, we have to challenge the narrative around productivity that just dominates our society. Neala Adari recommends listening to movements like the NAP Ministry.
Yes, which promotes rest as resistance.
Rest as resistance.
We are conditioned to a mentality that praises Black bodies for working so hard and studying until they fall asleep at the library. We have to change that narrative and embrace rest as a tool for liberation. Rest is a prerequisite for sustained, ethical, long-term engagement. It's not just a reward for having worked yourself to the point of collapse.
That's the only way to build a movement that can actually endure for decades.
The only way.
So if you encounter that online toxicity, the nitpicking, the abrasive personalities, the superficial corporate stuff, the most crucial thing to remember is the core purpose. The movement is fundamentally about collective action aimed at structural change. And that goal remains.
That is the definitive synthesis. The goal remains the pursuit of a better place, not just for some women, but for all women, as Lynn Segal put it. The messy, imperfect humans you see on social media are just negotiating the difficult, flawed process of activism in a toxic digital world.
But the ideology,
the structural analysis that proves oppression is systematic, that confirms the fight is still necessary, even if the individual messengers are unbearable.
Feminism isn't a static dogma then. It's a dynamic process. It requires constantly clarifying and retooling its own practices and assumptions. And that process shouldn't be rejected just because some of the participants are exhausted or abrasive.
It's exactly. The legislative and policy struggles for reproductive freedom, for equal pay, for safety from violence, for equity across all systems, they all rely on the underlying structural necessity of the movement. And that exists entirely independently of any individual's flaws.
And the ability of the movement to evolve, to absorb its own critiques, moving from a narrow ethnocentric focus to a truly intersectional one, that's the ultimate proof of its intellectual strength, not its weakness.
So when you see a messenger behaving badly, what you're really watching is the visible strain of a deeply important ongoing structural fight. You are not watching the invalidation of the ideology itself.
And history shows us that great movements, suffrage, civil rights, gender equality, they have always been internally fraught, messy, and divisive. Yet they endure and they deliver change because the need for structural justice persists.
The work of challenging systems that are designed to perpetuate inequality is not only ongoing, but it's a collective path. It requires tenacity, community care, and a clear focus on the why, even when the individual who is profoundly frustrating. That structural why is the solid ground.